A group of friends and I just got back from shooting the Mississippi Section Championship. And if you're not familiar with USPSA, a section championship is pretty much a state championship. So today I want to quickly talk to you and show you my process for using footage to increase and accelerate my growth in my training after I have done matches. Now, to be absolutely clear here, you can record yourself when you're training too and get very similar value. But what I get from match footage is being able to truly see what I'm doing on demand, whether my match pace is a little too timid or a little too aggressive for where my skill level is actually at. And then of course I'm able to dial in and look at different areas in my fundamental skills that I can really target and work on if certain ones are falling behind. Let's jump right into it. Okay, I've got headphones on so you don't have to hear the audio twice. That would suck. So here the match is in chronological order, and what we're going to do is just start from the very first stage. Again, you can see this is a much tighter angle, so I would really prefer, if I was shooting this footage for the sake of performance review, to see what's going on from the ground up. If there's any problems with my stance, if I'm only on one foot when I should be pretty planted, especially for more accurate shots, I'd like to see that type of stuff. But we're gonna make do with what we've got here and just watch and see what we can glean from it. So here we go. Okay, this one I was pretty happy with, especially for a cold start, right? This is the first stage of the day. These are the very first rounds that you'll typically be firing in a match. So I'm pretty satisfied with this. The reason why is because I've been working a lot on keeping the gun up as I'm entering a position, and you can see that is exactly what happened as the timer went off. Prioritize getting the gun out. The gun is already up. Solid reload. From this angle, you can't see exactly how tight this port is. If there's any more juice I could have squeezed from this, it would be just generally making everything faster, which is always something that we can do. But I would guess that I could have positioned myself a little bit better so that I wouldn't have had to have as severe of a lean on this transition here. So that could have saved a little bit of time as well. But other than that, I'm pretty happy with that. Again, you don't need to tear apart and be negative about all of your performances. What I'm really looking for are big deficiencies where I see that and I'm like, whoa, okay, let's really focus on this. So here is the second stage. And this looks like I'm already moving. So let's wait and come back. Here we go. Okay, again, that was a pretty spicy run for that stage. I forgot what I was overall, but it was a pretty solid score, especially for carry optics. So what I'm looking at, again, is the speed of the transitions, especially on a stage like this where there's really only two positions and there's a lot of opportunity to blend them. So again, a lot of people struggled with those first two targets because it was a bit of an awkward lean, and you can hear there wasn't that blatant of a gap in the transition, so that was nice. And then here you can see I'm getting the gun up as I'm settling into position and already firing on those open targets on the far right. Yeah, so I'm pretty happy with that. Now, this stage was probably my best performance of the match. I would have to look at practice score to see, but this is one of the ones that was like a whoa run. So you can see this here. Yeah, so This was a very good run. This was the second fastest time on the stage, if I remember correctly, at the very least in carry optics. And what held the final score back was a single mic on paper during this array here. So it was a popper, target, and then a popper. And I went 1 for 1 on the steal. So ping, pop, pop, ping. And I just did not have the visual patience for a solid second shot. I did not call the mic, of course, or else I would have made it up. So that's definitely something that we're going to be hammering on in training. Yep. But yeah, the movement there, we can analyze that a little bit. You can see getting the gun out. All right, if you look at the way my feet are here, I would really like my feet to be a bit more planted than they currently are. And you can see that happened in the very first position of the stage too, where I'm up on 1 foot. Actually, no, I'm on my toes on both feet, that looks very silly. This was a lean, but it was not a severe enough lean to where it warranted having to be on my toes like that. So one thing I'd really like to work on is planting my feet, especially from seeing this. So what I will do in training is set up positions that are very similar to this, maybe even more severe, and really focus on planting my feet, making sure my heels are on the ground, my legs are loaded, and they're ready to move so that I can explode out of that position whenever it's time to get out of there. You can see here, I probably took a drop step. A very subtle one, but yeah, you can see that was definitely not as fast as it could have been. So you can see here, I had to watch this multiple times because I'm looking at different things. This is a completely fine thing to do. In fact, it's probably more beneficial than trying to absorb everything all at once, right? So watch it once, just looking at your stance and making sure that's good. Watch it again to make sure you've got the gun up when it needs to be up. Watch your other mechanics on another run. Like, watch this stuff as many times as you need to so that you can squeeze as much benefit as possible out of watching this footage. All right, here's another stage, and this one was coming off of that really good performance. Despite the mic, it was still a very good run. This is when I started to care about the match. So when we get into the mental game and start discussing that, this is definitely something to keep in mind as you're analyzing your performance and being like, okay, what was going on in my head when I've done my best runs, and then what was going on in my head during my worst runs? And I can tell you with 100% certainty, after that stage and all the compliments I received, I let a little bit of that get to my head too much. And it caused me to start to really care about the outcome of the match, because I started to think, oh wow, I could be somebody, right? When you do that, it just adds artificial pressure to the amount of pressure that was already there. And I don't think pressure is a negative thing. I think anything worth doing in life is going to make you at least a little bit nervous. If you're just avoiding pressure altogether, that's probably a problem, and you're going to live a very boring life if you're just avoiding stress and nerves all the time. So pressure's good, but what we don't want to do is enhance it and make it worse than it already is, right? So here is this stage. All right, mags out. So already you can see there's a little bit of a delay here. I needed to grab that gun and get away from the table into the first position. You can see I'm gonna take about a half second here to pick up the gun and realize, oh, I can be doing this on the move. I shot into position decently on this second position. The part that hurt the most about this stage was a mic here. You can see I took 4 shots on it. There were like 2 or 3 bullet holes right above the cardboard on the target stick. And I believe that was due to not necessarily a lack of visual patience, because I was doing my best to call solid shots, but I think I was loosening my support hand grip like a lot of people will do when they're trying to take a more accurate shot. And because of that, I was starting to drive the gun ever so slightly to the left, and it was just enough to push 3 of those 4 shots completely off the cardboard. So 30-yard partials are definitely going to be in the training mix. I will say that much. Let's look at the rest of this. All right. So another thing here with movement, you can see I got very tall here when I could have stayed lower, kept my rear end lower, and been in a more athletic stance so that I could just cruise on and keep moving. But you can see I look very tall, and not in like a, oh, I'm 6 foot type of way, but I'm just very upright, and that stance is not conducive to more athletic, explosive movement. So this is something I've been working on for months. It's been a pretty bad habit, and you can easily develop it by shooting a lot on a flat firing line where there's very little movement, or maybe even 1 or 2 steps. You can get away with staying pretty tall. But when you start shooting longer field courses like this, you're gonna see all of the winners, all of the champions, they are dropping their butt and they are leaning forward and they are getting as much structure behind the gun as they can, while also being able to be almost in a sprinter's position so that they can get out of whatever position they're in as quickly as possible. And of course, it's more stable for shooting as well than being very upright. So we're not going to see much of the back. Yeah, we just skipped this. All right, next stage. So that was a mini popper at about 20 yards. I'm pretty happy with that. Right? It's very good to, like, don't attack yourself every time you review footage. Try to find things that are positive too, especially for your skill level, right? So as you're starting out, it's very likely, it's certain, honestly, that nothing you do is going to be better than the person who won the match, even at locals, right? What you need to be doing is identifying things that you're good at, and just take a moment to give yourself a pat on the back for the work you've been doing when you have a part of your skills that are stronger than the others. So this was nice. Let's talk about something we can improve though. So you can see as we're watching this the second time, this transition was a little slow for what it was. So I'm transitioning from the steel to open IPSC paper at about 7 yards. And you can see there's a bit of a delay, as if I surprised myself by successfully going 1 for 1 on the steel. Don't do that. So, yep. And I want to watch here because I remember, yep. So you can see the dirt impacting right here. I sent a second shot on that no shoot right over the top of the target, and that ended up being a mic. So that one really hurt the performance on this stage. All right, now this stage is without a doubt my biggest failure of the match, and it was less of a technical one and more of a mental one, and it was very severe. So it starts off very strong, and then you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. Let's just watch it. All right, so where things fell apart started before I executed the stage. So this was the one stage where I was stuck between 2 stage plans because I saw it get run very well 2 different ways. And the 2 stage plans involved when to take that small popper and when to take that paper target that I had not engaged at the end there. And you can see, if we skip ahead to where that happened, I bring my gun down because I thought I'm done shooting, and I'm just looking around, and the moment I see that small popper, my brain is completely melting at this point. I was like, how did this happen? So I put the magazine back in my gun, and instead of attacking it as quickly as I could, I started shooting it with one hand. That's a problem. And the best way I can explain why that happened is not because I consciously gave up, but because this is a habit that I had built in my training. So if I had shot and missed at a target that I thought was, fairly easy, and I was, kind of miffed with myself about it, I would, just for fun, shoot it one-handed just to prove to myself, like, I can shoot this. You shouldn't be doing that at matches. And because you shouldn't be doing that at matches, you should absolutely not be doing that in training. Because as you can see, when your stage does not go according to plan, and all of a sudden you have to consciously think because you didn't program the right stage, this is what will happen. You're going to resort to what you've been doing in training. And if you've been goofing off in training, these are the results you're going to get. So in my case, I had to immediately take a step back and have an internal conversation about why I'm here. Why am I traveling out of state? Why am I spending all of this money? Why am I taking time away from my family if I'm going to come to a match and just fuck off? There's no other way to address that. You have to be very matter of fact about things like this. So this behavior is unacceptable. I would consider this to be unprofessional and borderline disrespectful, like right up there with registering for a bodybuilding show as a fat person, right? You just don't even deserve to be there if you're gonna do stuff like this. So this was incredibly disappointing. I'm sharing it with you so that hopefully it will put your mind in the right headspace before you ever do something like this. But yeah, that's what came from this. And this was an important lesson, because to do this at even a bigger match would be even more disappointing, right? So don't do that. Do the right things in training. The part that I'm going to take home moving forward, again, is not beating myself up over this. There's no need to, continuously harp on it. I know what I did wrong. So what I'm going to do moving forward is simply stop screwing around in training. If I miss a target and I'm still shooting, I'm going to finish what I'm doing, right? The same way that, and I'll give the tactical instructors a little bit of credit here, the whole train how you fight, like if you have a malfunction, you need to work through that as quickly as possible and finish the course of fire that you have agreed to do and that you're on the clock for, right? So enough about that. I think you get the point at this point, but I was saying that more for myself than anyone else at this point. So let's move on. Here is the next stage. Now, this performance wasn't fantastic, but I did a really good job at locking back in after having that bad of a stage, and then, being pretty hard on myself immediately after that. So I was able to hit the refresh button and start doing what I do. So a little off pace on time. You can see I could have navigated this a little bit better. But for where my skill level's at, I shot just maybe a little bit under what I could have done. I'm looking at blending positions here. You can see the transitions. You can see the transitions to and from steel were half decent. Fumbled the reload a little bit. And again, you can see the reason that happened, we can dive into that a bit deeper, is if you start to drop your magazine and your gun is already sideways, you're gonna have a really hard time getting the mag out compared to hitting the magazine release button while the gun is vertical. So keep that in mind. All right, so this was a pretty good stage, but there's still some things that we can talk about it. So the first thing I want to look at is the table start itself, how quickly we're getting that gun up. A little bit of a delay on presentation. So again, work this stuff in dry fire. If I'm going to the range later today, I'm not going to be doing table starts. I'm going to be doing stuff like that at home because that's where it's most productive to do it. So And then we can look at the reload here. Nope, not that one. You can see if you release your hand too soon, you can get a reload that ends up like this, where it sticks a little bit. And this one worked out. It was still a relatively fast reload, but it could have been much faster if we had done that properly. So keep that index finger along the front of the mag on the bullet side and make sure it gets home. But yeah, there's that stage. And then here is the final stage, and this is the fixed time stage. So there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then a double stack of targets with a no shoot in between. Here we go. So, pretty good attack here. I collected decent points too. There was only a couple Charlies or so. So the points were half decent. I got 44, which was a half decent run, especially because I didn't shoot the final 2 shots at the target. And the reason I didn't do that is because in my head, I was farther behind on time than I actually was. And I perceived that because me getting the gun up and presenting it to the first target was a little slower than I wanted it to be. And in reality, it wasn't actually that slow. I finished the stage in 3.4 seconds, and the par time was 4 seconds. So I had more than enough time to fire those final 2 shots and try to collect some extra points, and I simply didn't. So I believe fixed time stuff is also something that would be helpful for you to do, especially if you're shooting major matches. I don't know how your club is if you're shooting competitions, but our club doesn't do fixed time stages, so I do not get a lot of opportunities to work on stuff like this. So I need to do it in training, right? That's the bottom line. At this point, I'm fairly confident that I've got some clear things to work on from here, right? So from what we've looked at here, the biggest things I'm going to be looking at are making sure that my stance and my posture are as solid as possible throughout courses of fire, especially longer ones that involve movement, and then also positions where you really need to settle and remain accurate. So that's number 1, stance and posture. Number 2 for me is going to be maintaining accuracy at farther partial targets, right? So part of that is making sure your gun is zeroed. Of course, mine is, so we know that's not an issue. And then the rest of that is going to be visual discipline and making sure that we have a grip that's going to support us shooting at farther distances. You can call shots with a bad grip and still be accurate. But again, if your grip is poor, you are hurting yourself. So the third thing I want to work on, again, and this is the biggest problem that we had points-wise, but not necessarily the biggest problem that we had skill-wise. It was just one big gaffe that we never want to happen again, is the mental problem that occurred on this stage. And what we're going to do to fix that is reframe our training to make it more serious, right? If you're going to be taking yourself seriously as a shooter, you need to not just take your matches seriously, but also take your training seriously. And if you're trying to become a world-class shooter, you're going to have to also take diet, fitness, and many other areas of your life seriously, so that they can revolve a little bit around supporting you becoming the best shooting athlete that you can be. If you're not taking it seriously and you just want to be a half decent shooter and do this as a hobby, that's perfectly fine, right? My goals are different, so my approach to training has to change. That's the bottom line. All right, and that's pretty much all there is to it. You can, analyze this more. Maybe there's a couple things I missed that y'all can, bring up in the comments and pick apart. But again, the main goal here of having footage of your matches is not just to be able to look at your progression over a long period of time or make cool hype content for Instagram, but it's also an incredibly productive tool for your training when you use it in this manner and you actually sit down and look at your biggest gaps in your performance, right? I've used an analogy before that compares all the different skills in shooting to a pie, and if certain slices of your pie are rotten and others are fresh, it would be silly of us to try and make the fresh ones fresher when the 2 rotten slices are ruining the entire pie, right? So let's freshen up the stance and the posture. Let's freshen up the accuracy on far partial targets. And let's take our pie making seriously. I went too far with that analogy, but you get the point. If you've implemented this in your training and gotten some value from it, let other people know in the comments what your experience has been like. Thank you for watching, and I hope this video made you a better marksman.